Welcome to the Journey to Joy podcast, where candid sharing from Tamara's journal will uncover her personal insights of finding joy after childhood trauma. Discover how little life lessons born out of difficulty can become beacons of light, encouraging you to go deeper, to find your true self, guided by sparks of inspiration and insight. Now, let's welcome your host, Tamara Ridge.
Hey, thanks, pal.
Told you I could do a good job.
Hey there, I'm Tamara Ridge, and I'm so excited to welcome you to my brand new podcast. This is episode 1, where I tell you about the meeting I had with my brand new friend and how she inspired me to start my podcast. I hope you enjoy. I made a friend. I know that isn't so unusual for a lot of people, but for me, it is. At my age, I'm 57, I've told myself a lot of stories about why I don't have many friends. Of course, I lost a lot of people when I left Mormonism. When I confronted those people with my choice to be true to myself and choose freedom, my former friends chose loyalty to what they knew, and I don't blame them. There was a point in my life when I might have done the same thing. Aside from that, it seems like I've spent my life recycling people. When you grow up in a home that doesn't meet your needs for safety or love and belonging, at least my relationship skills consisted of finding people who might threaten my safety and love and belonging, so I could prove my worth to them and prove that all the pain and misery of my growing up home was invalid, that I was actually lovable. Yeah, so that was never a great strategy. And I had to end relationships with people who didn't really value who I really was. And for the last 2.5 years, at the time of the recording of this episode, I've been a digital nomad, traveling the Mountain West, Airbnb hopping. And lots of people would think that that's glamorous, but someone like me, who withdraws when I see a potential safety, love, and belonging sucking person, it can be lonely. That's why meeting this new friend is so exciting to me. Within moments of meeting, I notice that we laugh at the same things. She laughs as loud as I do, and her nose wrinkles when she laughs, just like mine. Instant friendship and connection made me want to quit being a nomad and move right into the neighborhood. Since that first meeting 3 weeks ago, we've talked and laughed for hours. And her hugs, that she describes as awkwardly long, are the frosting on the cake of hello and goodbye, with wonderful conversation layered in between. It's our last conversation that has inspired this podcast, The Journey to Joy. In one of our first meetings, I casually mentioned, as I often do, that I have an online community where I help people heal after childhood trauma. It's also my habit to mention that therapy has never really worked for me, so I wanted to put together a solution to help people overcome the dependence on therapy that often happens when childhood trauma has been the experience. So our last conversation happened on the porch of her off-grid home, set in a meadow on a 35-acre piece of peace and quiet in the gorgeous northern Wyoming frontier. We were surrounded by her 3 rescue dogs and deer who sauntered by, probably eavesdropping. So my friend had digested this idea that I had healed from trauma without much therapy, and she had a lot of questions. So many questions. I told her my stories of moments of insight that led me out of unhealthy situations and relationships. For example, I told her that when I was 7 years old, I was standing in front of my mother, who was terribly obese and quite angry. And when my mother hissed the words, "I hate you because you're thin," to a little 7-year-old girl, my response in my head was, "You say that to me because you hate yourself because you're fat. That's not about me." And my friend said, "What? You were 7? How did you know that when you were 7? And I told her another story of when I was getting my associate's degree in mathematics and natural sciences, and I would be upstairs working on a physics problem and sort of tearing my hair out. Physics and chemistry and calculus helped me learn how to use my brain, something I didn't really know how to do before, because I was born a left-brained person, but trauma tends to fill our body with emotions. And so from a very young age, I had a very strong desire to figure out why I had so much strong emotion and make the emotions make sense. And so I applied my left brain engineering talent to figuring that out. My friend said, "How did you do that?" People can't do that. Nobody knows how to do that. So I explained. I would listen to my body. I would pay attention to the emotions. And I would ask myself how things make sense and start reasoning through. And after a while, the world of emotions, whether they were the emotions of trauma or the emotions connected to real here and now experiences, they all had a logic that actually could be understood in a system. And my friend asked more questions. So I told her that when I was studying in my undergraduate degree, I still had a problem with compulsive overeating. And when I would be sitting working on a physics problem, the chocolate cake that I'd made was screaming my name from downstairs. Maybe you understand what that feels like. But when I started to experience that, I realized, wait a minute, what is it that I really need? Is it the cake? And it didn't take a lot of exploration before I realized that there were two things that were happening to me when I started craving junk food. One of them was potentially I didn't have enough time to complete a task that was in front of me. And when I became aware that I didn't have enough time, the compulsion to soothe myself with food would show up. The other condition that would cause that compulsive need to overeat was needing a nap. So as soon as I realized that, every time I felt the compulsion to eat chocolate cake, for example, I would stop and say, wait a minute. Am I trying to do a task that I think I don't have enough time to complete? And if so, will eating, going downstairs and jumping in some cake solve that problem? Or will it cause me to have less time to complete this task that's time limited? The answer was, I would have less time if I went and ate. So I made an agreement with myself to finish the task first and see if I still wanted the cake. Most of the time I didn't. The same question applied when I needed a nap. if I need a nap and I'm going down the stairs to eat junk food, I'm certainly not going to feel more rested. So let me first take a nap and see if I can feel more rested afterwards and if I'll still want that cake. And again, my friend said, how did you know what to do? How did you do that? And I told her I just paid attention to what I was hearing on the inside, and I applied logic to what I was hearing and understood. The next story that I told her is about how I was confronted by a Chihuahua when I was 30 years old. Now, being confronted by a Chihuahua seems like no big deal at all. In fact, especially against the background of the reality that I am a 6-foot tall woman, and that dog was as big as my foot. But owing to experiences of neglect when I was 5 years old, I was mauled by a dog in my own backyard. And that mauling led to plastic surgery on my face and throat to repair what that dog had done. So from the time I was 5 years old until I'm 30 and confronted by this Chihuahua, I have a belief that says I'm dog food. And if there's a dog anywhere around me in a neighborhood, that dog is going to smell dog food, and dog food that's scared is much more delicious. So I was the most delicious dog food. So on this day, I was coming back from a walk and came around the corner just in front of my home, and there it was, a Chihuahua. His teeth were showing, his hair on the back stood up on end, and he growled at me, and I absolutely froze. Did not know what to do. Then finally, this smart dog decided while facing me, he was going to make a big circle around me. And I thought, wow, what a great idea. So I started making a circle in the opposite direction. And pretty soon we had passed each other, and he could go his way and I could go mine. But then I went in my house and I leaned against the front door and I thought, what the heck just happened? That dog was as big as my foot. But when that dog was looking at me and snarling, I felt like a 5-year-old. And that was one of the first moments where I went, wait a minute, my brain is playing tricks on me. There's a problem with time in my brain when it connects to trauma. And I started to realize that the trauma brain has no hooks for time. It also has no language, which I'll probably get into in another episode. But this is the first time I realized that. And so I started testing my assumptions. Am I really dog food? Am I really 5 years old? Can I tell a difference between a dog who wants to eat me and one who doesn't? And I started paying attention to body language and what aggravates a dog and what would make a dog decide to eat you versus not. And pretty soon I didn't have fear of dogs. In fact, now I have a toy Australian Shepherd who was the same breed of the dog that caused me to need plastic surgery. So I was able to overcome my fear of dogs, having not one foot stepped into a therapist's office. And my friend again said, wait a minute, people can't do that. And I said, really? Because I think everybody can do that. She said, no, that level of self-awareness is unusual. So then we started talking about therapists in my life. And, the first therapist was abusive therapist. So I'm not going to talk about him. I did see that therapist for about 10 months. But the next therapist that I saw happened when I got triggered by my adopted daughter, who was 27 months old. I'd taken her to the park, and with the understanding that we'd have to leave the park early so that we could go to the parking lot across the street from her doctor's office, because she loved to ride the shuttle bus from the hospital across the street to the doctor's office. So it's time now to leave the park, and this little one is not willing to get off the swing to follow me to the car. And I say, here's the rules, let's go to the car. And she will not. She's just not budging, and she's looking at me with this face that's absolutely fixed and determined not to leave the park. And I froze and then panicked, and then I flipped out. I actually yelled at her all the way home about all the fun we were going to have on the bus. Ridiculous, right? But that's what I did. And when that happened, I ran to a therapist the next week. And I said, I'm a monster. I'm a monster. And the therapist was pretty non-excited about that. She basically said to me, she is not you. You have to let her be herself. And she's 36 pounds. Pick her up. So after that, that's what I did. I gave her choices. She's very much a freedom seeker, and I would say to her, okay, it's time for us to go. You come with mommy, or mom will carry you. You choose. And that worked like magic. But the thing that I realized coming from that is that when we've had a childhood that's been difficult, and then we have children, those children become little mirrors to us of our past. And whenever they do something that breaks a rule that we would have gotten in trouble for, we have the choice to stand there scared or to step into the anger or shame or guilt that our parents put on us to try to get us to do what they wanted us to do. Well, there's another way. It's healing trauma responses. It's recognizing when it comes up and then recognizing that what happened then isn't what's happening now. And that's what I realized I have to let her be herself and just pick her up. The final thing that I shared with my friend that caused her to make the statement that I'm going to share with you in just a second is the therapist who I was seeing. I was in my first marriage. I was almost finished with graduate school. And I realized that I was hating myself. Absolutely hating myself. So I thought, you know what? I need to go see a therapist. And one of the first things that the therapist did is he said, how's your marriage? And I said, this isn't about my marriage. This is about me hating myself. Well, it turns out it was my marriage. It was my marriage. But on the road to realizing that, I sat with that therapist one day and I was absolutely berating myself and saying all of the things that are wrong and all of the things that I do wrong, which, by the way, was an echo of the things that my then husband used to say to me. But the therapist asked me one very important question. He said, are you good? And in that moment, I did a scan of all of my life. I was still Mormon. I hadn't left the church yet. And I was the supreme rule follower. So I could not find any evidence of anything I did that would help me classify myself as not good. I followed the rules. I was nice to people. I was always honest. I did all the right things. But I sat there struggling because although logically I knew I was good, I couldn't say so. And in that stuck moment, I left that session thinking, wait a minute. It doesn't make sense for me not to be good, but yet I believe lies that have made me believe that I'm not good for so long that those lies feel like the truth. So that was a really good intervention, just that single question by a therapist. But all of the rest of the time that I've spent with therapists have been me sharing my insights, my awareness, the things I'm realizing, just like the way I'm sharing the things I'm realizing with you now. And this therapist who asked me, am I good, would then spend most of his time sitting with me, stroking his Dalmatian dog who was sitting next to him on the couch, and falling asleep. So I told my friend this story. I told her about those ways I used to talk to therapists. And I realized as I was telling her, oh yeah, the therapist, I didn't give them any work. They didn't have any work to do because I just sat there telling them what I was realizing. And my friend said, that's why therapy never worked for you. And she also said things like, my self-awareness is genuinely remarkable and more than people can typically do, and it makes me different. She also pointed out that I'm vibrant, that I smile constantly, I laugh easily, and she reflected that all of that shows how far I've come, and that I don't look at all like a person who came from the stories that I've told, especially, and she said, realizing that I gave her just the thumbnails, especially without therapy. And you know what? I have never thought that I was special. But I left that joyful girl hangout feeling seen and like I'm a very, very special human. And it changed the way I see myself. So I've decided to journal. I want to journal my observations about life, about self-esteem, about healing. I want to do all of that in the hyper-personal way that journaling has always been for me. And I'm going to share that stuff with you. That's the Journey to Joy podcast. My goal is to give you things to think about, to invite you to your own journey to deeper insight, to more joy. I absolutely believe that to think about the journey out of trauma and just to be satisfied with not being scared anymore, not being triggered anymore, feeling calm in our body isn't enough. We deserve joy. Survivors of trauma, we're resilient. Although we hate hearing that, we can heal. The truth is inside of us. We have to listen to it, and that will guide us to the joy, the freedom, that healing, that discovering life we deserve can bring. So, as you might already know, being seen in a community of friends is the best way to see your value. It's something I didn't imagine until I sat with this friend. So drop me a comment, ask me a question, and let's take this journey to joy together. I'd love to hear your thoughts, and I'd love to start a conversation about what happens on the inside, the stuff people don't see. I'm Tamara Ridge. Thanks for listening. Talk to you later.
Thank you for exploring the tiny details and glimmers of light with us. We hope these gatherings give you strength, inspiring you to look for your own guiding glimmers of light and hope. If you loved this episode as much as we did, give us a follow and we'll invite you back. Share it on all your social and go to tamararidge.com for a free class on Tamara's 4-phase framework for healing after childhood trauma. Remember, you are capable of healing and creating a life you love, the one you were meant to live.